My name is Atem Atem. I originally come from South Sudan.
And where do you live now?
I live in Sydney. Yeah, the full address?
Suburb?
I live in Riverwood,
When did you migrate to Australia?
2002,
And how old were you at the time?
28.
Can you share with us the reasons for leaving your home? What was the situation like in Sudan?
I left home because of war. War had started, and my father was participant in the politics of the war. So we really didn't actually live in the war zone. And my dad was in Saudi Arabia, but he was very involved in the politics of starting what became the Sudanese Liberation Army on the political side of it. And so he ended up going to Ethiopia, where the headquarters of that rebel group was, and he did some training, and then he came back to Saudi Arabia, and we ended up going to Ethiopia. So it's basically war. There was war, there was the politics of it. Dad was interested in it, and Dad decided the best thing to do is for us to go and to Ethiopia and join the rebel.
Do you remember leaving Sudan?
Yeah.
Can you share with us the moment? How did you prepare? Were you aware that you were going?
I did not know where I was going. So what had happened was we would normally go to visit Dad in Saudi Arabia over school holidays. So there was a school holiday, and we were going to see Dad as normal. So there was no indication of anything. And then we went to Saudi Arabia in a city called Jeddah. We were there that's where he used to live. We were there for a couple of days, and then in the middle of the night, a car turned up, and Dad asked us to come with him. So we jumped in the car, and we ended up in the airport, and we flew into Addis Ababa. That's it.
And how old were you when that happened?
10, 11, probably 12.
Did you have time to take anything with you?
It was a plane, so we took all our stuff to Ethiopia. Yeah.
And then what was life like in Ethiopia?
It was strange. We didn't speak the language that was spoken there, Amharic. We were in Addis Ababa for 3 months, and we were in this remote outside town place, and there were all these other people who lived there. So we lived with these people for like 3 months. We did know some of them before we got there, and so it was in a very beautiful rural sort of part of Addis Ababa, and there was a lake just outside the place. It was a big place, a big fence, and big property. And so a lot of it, there was bush, and there were like wild animals there, and like nobody owned them. They just came there because there was a lot of bush around there, and there was the lake just outside, this place. So it was like beautiful. Like you see it, it's really nice, it's beautiful. But we didn't understand why we were there. What I was sort of told later was that the rebel army that started now, which is the Sudan Liberation People Army, which is now running South Sudan, was what were they? They started as a socialist communist organization. Sorry, I'm getting excited now. Organization, and what that meant, they were being supported by USSR at the time, and Cuba. And so Cuba had this program for South Sudanese young people who were sort of members of the SPLA, by the fact that my family is part of that. So that program was taking kids from Ethiopia to Cuba for schooling. And so my understanding was that had wanted us to go, and there were 4 of us, to go to Cuba and get that education that was better than what was available. And so when we arrived, however, the program was something happened to the program and they stopped it. So we actually arrived there, and I understand a group had just left to Cuba, and so the next batch was going to go, and it never happened. So we ended up living in Addis Ababa for 3 months, and then somehow a decision was made. We go to live in the refugee camp, which was, I don't know, 500, 600 km away from Addis Ababa, like in the border of Sudan and Ethiopia, that would be western Ethiopia.
And then you lived in Kenya for a while as well before?
No. So lived in Ethiopia for 7 years in a refugee camp, and then moved to, because we couldn't stay, then we had to go, because at the time, in 91, the Ethiopian government fell to the rebels. The Ethiopian government was the Marxist, communist, socialist, use all those terms to describe that government had fallen to the rebels. And because of the SPLA's link to the government and the support that government was giving, we felt in the refugee camp that we couldn't stay because they're likely to come and kill all of us or something. And they did attack some refugee camps, and they did kill people and that sort of thing. So we sort of decided all the 3-4 camps that were in Western Ethiopia, populated by South Sudanese, had to evacuate. And we did evacuate back into Sudan, and I spent a year trucking across Sudan, and then I ended up in Kenya.
Because that's where the objects are from that you've brought. Yeah. And when did you decide to come to Australia, or was it your family again that decided for you?
Again, it was my family. It was my dad. My dad got someone who used to live in Canberra, proposed him and asked to propose him, and so we sort of tagged along to come to Australia. So that's how we came to Australia.
Do you remember arriving here? What thoughts did you have? Did it feel very different?
I didn't know much about Australia. I didn't take interest to find out anything. So for some reason, I thought Australia is a big desert. So and I remember landing into Sydney. You see the water, and then it's like bush everywhere. It's like, what? There's so much bush here. So we landed, and then the person who sponsored us was waiting for us there. So she picked us up. We got into her car, and we drove to Canberra. And we got to Canberra, and it was all bush. It's like, what happened to this place? It's supposed to be desert. Yeah, so that was a bit surprising. And I thought Sydney was the capital, but no, it was Canberra.
Can you tell us a little bit about the documents that you've brought?
Okay, so the documents that are here, this is a secondary school certificate. It's called, I can't even remember now what it's called. Whatever it's called, it's the certificate. And what they do when you finish high school, they send you a piece of paper with results just to say you finished, and then later on they send you the certificate. And this one here is what you got from the school as a testimony, just to say, you have been in school, you have been a good boy. I was at a boys' school. It was a boarding school outside the camp. I studied there for 4 years. And when I finished, this one here is when I finished secondary school and I came back to the camp. Because there was nothing else to do. There was lots of youth activities, and someone got us into a leadership program, an outdoor leadership program. So I had to go for 2 weeks onto Mount Kenya and trekked up the mountain. First time see snow falling, and we had to hike really up for 2 weeks, and it was amazing. So that's that program.
And why are they important to you?
Why are these ones important? I don't know about this, but these ones, the school certificates ones, are important because in the refugee camp, Kakuma refugee camp where I was in Kenya, and this goes for South Sudanese, the whole idea of education was very, very important. And one of the things that we were told when we were kids in Ethiopia and coming to Kenya is we were the leaders of tomorrow. We are still waiting to be leaders of tomorrow. But part of that, this war was being fought on our behalf, that there was oppression, that, our parents wanted to bring it to an end so that, when we grow up, we don't live that oppression. We live in a free society. And education was seen as significant because you learn all the skills that you need to run a country, So education was very, very important, and this was an achievement. Now, in the refugee camp, I went to, by the time I got there, I was in my last year of primary school in Kenya. So primary school goes until year 8. So when I arrived in Kakuma, I've done year 7. So I arrived towards the middle of the school year. So I went to year 7, went to year 8, and that was end of primary school. And we had a lot of struggles. But to cut the story short, I got a scholarship after doing the exams and doing really well. I got a scholarship to take me outside the camp. And at that time, nobody went outside the camp to do anything. And I got a good scholarship. And, we lived in a boarding school for most of the year. But I would come back to the camp. But that gave me status in the camp, and other people who got the scholarship. There were 4 of us at the time. We had some status in the community because we were educated, and we were the next educated people. Yeah.
Thank you. One last quick question. Why do you think it's important to share your story with a broader audience?
I think it's important to have these stories told because one of the things that the Australian public doesn't understand about people who migrate and specifically about refugees is that we have stories. We are not just these people who come here who want to destroy the country. We have stories, and they are important to be told because this thing, ask anybody here, they think you are in a refugee camp doing nothing with your life, But people do try hard to make something of their life even in those situations. And when they come here, they try hard to really make something out of it because that's what they know how to do. But sometimes the rhetoric and the politics and the way things are doesn't allow people to actually achieve the things they want to achieve. And so these stories are important to tell people, hey, don't look at me on the street as a gang member or as a useless person. I actually have a story, I have aspiration, I have things I want to achieve in this country. But you have got to listen to me, you have got to give me the space for me to do it.